People think the worst part of being replaced is watching it happen. They're wrong. The worst part is hearing your own son introduce another man as your father. While you're standing close enough to shake his hand, I'm proud to have the man who truly taught me how to be a husband standing beside me today. The guests applauded, then my son smiled toward the front row. My father-in-law, Richard. Another round of applause, then his eyes found me near the entrance. "Oh, and Dad," his smile tightened. "There isn't enough room up front. Would you mind staying in the back?" A few guests turned to look at me. He laughed awkwardly. "You know how these wedding photos are. I don't want anything distracting." Distracting. That was the word he chose. Not unnecessary, not inconvenient, distracting. As though I were an old coat someone forgot to put away. I simply nodded. "No problem." I walked toward the back of the ballroom without another word. No scene, no argument, no pleading. Just one quiet step after another. If anyone had looked closely, they would have noticed something strange. I wasn't carrying a wedding gift, because I'd already decided he wasn't getting one. My name is Leonard Mercer. I'm 68 years old. Until that afternoon, I believed the hardest part of fatherhood was raising a son alone. I was wrong. The hardest part was realizing he'd rewritten our story without asking if I wanted to disappear from it. His name is Owen Mercer, 34, successful architect, confident, charming. The kind of man people describe as self-made. I used to smile whenever I heard that. Now, it just made me wonder how easily people confuse silence with truth. His bride was Amelia Grant, decent, thoughtful, one of the few people who always greeted me with a genuine hug. I don't think she knew what Owen planned to say. When he asked me to stay in the back, I saw her expression change, confusion, then discomfort. But the ceremony continued before she could say anything. Richard Grant stepped proudly beside Owen, tall, expensive tuxedo, perfect smile. He wrapped an arm around my son as photographers snapped picture after picture. Flash, flash, flash. Every photograph captured the family Owen wanted the world to see. And I wasn't in it. People often ask why I didn't leave. Silable, because I promised Amelia months earlier that nothing would ruin her wedding day. She deserved one happy memory. I wasn't going to steal it because my son had forgotten who raised him. So I stayed, near the back beside the catering entrance, close enough to hear everything, far enough away to pretend I belonged there. Watching them laugh together, I couldn't stop remembering another wedding, mine. 40 years earlier, Owen was only 3 when his mother packed 2 suitcases and left. She didn't run away with another man. She didn't die. She simply decided motherhood wasn't the life she wanted. She signed the divorce papers, moved across the country, and called less with every passing year until the calls stopped altogether. From then on, it was just me and Owen. I worked mornings driving a city bus, evenings repairing industrial generators, weekends fixing neighbors' broken appliances for extra cash. Not because I loved working, because children don't care whether rent is due. They still need shoes. They still outgrow coats. They still wake up hungry. There were nights I'd pretend I'd already eaten, just so Owen would finish the last sandwich without feeling guilty. He never knew. And that was exactly how I wanted it. When he was 14, he announced he wanted to become an architect. Most parents would have nodded politely. I emptied my savings account the next morning, bought him his first professional drafting set. He carried it everywhere for years. At graduation, he hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "You've always believed in me." I'll never forget that. Funny how confidently young people make promises. They honestly believe they'll keep them forever. Things began changing after Owen met Richard Grant. Richard wasn't cruel. He was polished, successful. One of those men who entered every room as though he'd built it himself. Luxury hotels, private clubs, political fundraisers, country estate parties. That was his world. Mine smelled like engine oil and sawdust. I didn't belong there. At first, it didn't matter. Richard always treated me politely, but little comments started appearing. "So Leonard, you still enjoy working with your hands?" As though it were an unusual hobby. Or, "Owen has come so far. I'm glad he found people who understand his ambitions." People, not father, people. Each sentence sounded harmless until you stacked enough of them together. About 6 months before the wedding, Owen stopped asking me for advice. Then he stopped calling every Sunday. Then birthdays became quick text messages instead of dinners. Eventually, every conversation felt rushed, like he had somewhere more important to be. One afternoon, I invited him over to help rebuild the porch swing we'd started years earlier. He answered without looking up from his phone. "I've got plans with Richard." Maybe next time. There wasn't a next time. The unfinished swing still sat in my garage, covered by a tarp waiting for a father and son who never came back. 3 weeks before the wedding, Owen visited my house. He looked uncomfortable. "Dad, I wanted to talk about seating." I smiled. "Sure." He avoided my eyes. "The Grants have a lot of business connections coming." "I know, so we're trying to keep the immediate family section a certain way." I frowned slightly. "What do you mean?" "You'll still be there, just not at the front table." I stared at him. I thought parents usually sat together. They do. But Richard will be hosting most of the guests. Hosting? Interesting word. The wedding wasn't at Richard's estate. He wasn't paying for all of it either. In fact, I'd quietly covered the entire honeymoon after Owen admitted money was tight. No one knew because he'd asked me not to mention it. I don't want people thinking I needed help. So I kept quiet, like fathers often do. I simply told him, "Whatever makes your day easier." He smiled with relief. "Thanks, Dad." That was the last genuine smile he gave me before the wedding. Standing in the back of the ballroom, I watched the photographer arrange another family portrait, parents closer together. Richard stepped beside Amelia, then Owen joined him. The photographer looked around. "Is the groom's father joining?" Before I could answer, Owen spoke first. "No, he's fine where he is." I watched the photographer hesitate, then continue working. That single sentence hurt more than everything else, not because of where I was standing, but because of how easily he said it, as though I'd already become invisible. As the applause echoed through the ballroom, my phone vibrated once inside my jacket, a message not from Owen, not from Amelia, from someone whose name I hadn't seen in almost 15 years. I read the first line, and for the first time that entire afternoon, I smiled. The message contained only 11 words. "If you're finally ready, I'm waiting in courtroom 3.
Helen.
Helen. I hadn't spoken that name aloud in over a decade. Helen Crawford, the family court mediator who handled my divorce all those years ago. She'd retired shortly afterward, or at least I thought she had. For a moment I wondered if someone was playing a cruel joke. Then my phone rang, unknown number. I stepped quietly into the hallway outside the ballroom. "Mr. Mercer?" "Yes, this is Helen. I apologize for contacting you today of all days. I tried reaching you yesterday. I need to speak with you." I looked back through the ballroom doors. Owen was laughing with Richard while photographers arranged another family portrait. "I can't leave. It concerns your former wife." Everything inside me froze. "My former wife?" "Yes, there are documents that require your acknowledgement. I can't discuss them over the phone." "When?" Helen answered calmly. "Whenever you're ready." I looked at the ballroom one last time. "I'll be there after the reception." "No, it really should be today." The urgency in her voice surprised me. I checked the time. The reception had barely started. For the first time all afternoon, I realized nobody would notice if I disappeared. Not one person had spoken to me in over an hour. I quietly walked back inside, found Amelia, congratulated her. She hugged me warmly. "I'm so happy you're here." "So am I," she smiled. "You'll stay for dinner, right?" "I may have to step out." She looked disappointed. "I understand." Then she whispered something that caught me off guard. "I'm sorry about earlier." I looked into her eyes. She knew. Maybe not everything, but enough. I squeezed her hand. "Today's about you. Don't carry someone else's mistake." Then I left. No announcement, no goodbye, nobody noticed. Courtroom 3 wasn't holding a trial. It was empty. Helen sat alone at one of the benches. She stood when she saw me. "You look older. So do you." She laughed softly. "I suppose that's how time works." We sat. She placed a thin folder beside her. No dramatic reveal, no secret inheritance, no mysterious fortune. Just paperwork. "Do you remember the custody agreement?" "Of course." It stated that Owen's mother could request supervised contact at any time. I nodded. "She never did." Helen sighed. "No, she didn't." "What changed?" Helen looked toward the courtroom windows. She's dying. Those two words landed heavier than I expected, not because I still loved her, because once, she had been my entire future. What happened? Advanced heart failure. She has months. Maybe less. I remained silent. Helen continued. She contacted the court 3 weeks ago. She wanted to know if there was any way to speak with Owen. I almost laughed. 3 weeks, 31 years late. Does Owen know? No, she asked us not to contact him until she decided. And now, she changed her mind. Helen slid a business card across the bench. She wants to tell him herself. I stared at the card, a hospice center, 3 hours away. I don't understand. Why tell me? Because she also said something else. Helen hesitated. She believes Owen hates her. He doesn't. He barely remembers her, exactly. But she believes he replaced her. I frowned. What does that mean? Helen answered quietly. She follows his life online. She saw today's wedding photographs. She saw him calling another man dad. I closed my eyes. Somehow, the cruelty of the day had reached someone who abandoned him decades ago. Life had an odd sense of timing. I drove back toward the reception. Halfway there, I pulled into a quiet park, sat on a bench, watched children chase pigeons. For nearly an hour, I wasn't thinking about my ex-wife. I was thinking about Owen. Somewhere along the way, he'd become obsessed with belonging to rooms where he never believed he fit. Richard represented that world. Elegant, connected, successful. Maybe calling Richard dad wasn't about replacing me. Maybe it was about replacing the version of himself he thought people judged. The son of a bus driver, the kid from the small brick house, the boy whose father fixed washing machines after midnight. Maybe he'd convinced himself those years were embarrassing. That hurt more than anything. Not because of my job, because I'd been proud of every honest dollar. When I returned to the ballroom, dinner was nearly over. Nobody asked where I'd been, not until Owen walked over. There you are. I was wondering, were you? He looked uncomfortable. The photographer wants one more family picture. I smiled politely. Now? Yeah. I followed him. Outside the ballroom, he stopped. There are too many people. What do you mean? I just think it'll be simpler if Richard stays beside us. And maybe you stand near the end. Near the end, even in the picture? I was an afterthought. Before I could answer, a voice interrupted us. No. We both turned. Amelia stood behind us, still wearing her wedding dress. Her expression had completely changed. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking directly at her husband. You told me Leonard didn't like photographs. Owen blinked. What? You said he preferred staying in the background. Silent. She looked at me. Is that true? I answered honestly. No. She slowly turned back toward Owen. Then why is your father standing alone while mine is in every single picture? Owen couldn't answer, neither could Richard, because for the first time all day, someone had finally asked the question nobody else was willing to ask, and every guest nearby had stopped talking to hear the answer. The ballroom went completely silent. Even the violinist stopped playing. Amelia stood between us, her bouquet still in one hand. She repeated the question. Why? No one answered. Richard cleared his throat. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. She looked at her father. No, I asked my husband. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The silence did all the work. Owen forced a smile. Babe, let's not do this here. She didn't move. Then where? When were you planning to tell me? He looked confused. Tell you what? That your father wasn't welcome at our wedding. I never said he wasn't welcome. She gestured toward me. You made him stand by the service entrance. You introduced my father as your father. You left yours out of every family photograph. Her words hit harder than shouting ever could. Several guests quietly turned away. Others watched without pretending not to. Owen rubbed the back of his neck. I was trying to avoid awkwardness. I finally spoke. For who? He looked at me. You wouldn't understand. That sentence almost made me laugh. I raised you. I probably understand more than anyone. He sighed. Dad, the people Richard knows, the investors, my firm's partners, they expect. He stopped. They expect what? He couldn't finish the sentence. Richard quietly stepped forward. Owen, enough. But Owen had already gone too far. They expect someone different. There it was, finally, not polished, not hidden the truth. Different not because I embarrassed him, because my life embarrassed him. I nodded slowly. So the man who taught you honesty doesn't fit the image. He didn't answer because he couldn't. Amelia removed her wedding ring, not dramatically, not angrily. She simply slid it off her finger and held it in her palm. I'm asking one last time. Did you ask your father to stay in the back because you were ashamed of him? The room felt frozen finally. Owen whispered, yes. Nobody moved, nobody breathed, even Richard looked stunned. Amelia closed her eyes for a moment, then she placed the ring into Owen's hand. I'm not continuing the reception. He stared at her. What? I married a man. I didn't marry an image. She turned toward me. I'm sorry. You deserved better today. I shook my head gently. No. You deserve to know. She nodded once before walking out of the ballroom. Her bridesmaids followed immediately. Half the guests did too. Within minutes, the celebration had become an empty room filled with uncomfortable silence. Richard remained standing beside Owen. Then he did something I never expected. He looked directly at me. I'm sorry. Owen stared at him. Richard raised his hand. No, you don't get to interrupt. He turned back toward his son-in-law. When you first started dating Amelia, I admired how often you talked about your father. Owen looked confused. You said he worked 2 jobs. You said he never missed a school event. You said everything you accomplished started with him. Richard's voice remained calm. So why did today look nothing like the son I got to know? Nobody answered. Richard continued. My father was a surgeon. He wanted me to become one. I became an accountant. For 5 years, he refused to speak to me. He paused. I would have traded every dollar I've ever earned for one father who showed up. He looked toward me. You had one. You just didn't recognize his value. Those words landed harder than anything I'd said all day because they came from the very man Owen had chosen over me. Most guests quietly left. Some offered awkward handshakes. Others avoided eye contact completely. Within half an hour, only a handful of family members remained. Owen finally walked over. His tuxedo was wrinkled. His tie hung loose. I ruined everything. I looked around the nearly empty ballroom. No, you revealed everything. They're different. He lowered his head. I don't know why I became like this. I do. He looked up. You spent years trying to impress people who never asked you to stop loving the ones who already did. He blinked. I thought success meant leaving the old life behind. I smiled sadly. No, success is remembering who carried you there. Before either of us could say another word, my phone rang. It was Helen. I stepped aside. Hello. Her voice sounded quieter than before. She doesn't have much time. I know. She asked one question. What was it? Helen hesitated. She asked if Owen still smiles the way he did when he was 6. I looked across the ballroom. My son stood alone, holding a wedding ring in one hand, staring at the floor. No, I answered honestly. I don't think he does. After hanging up, I walked back toward him. There is something you need to know. He looked exhausted. What? It isn't about today. It isn't about the wedding. It concerns someone you've spent your entire life believing stopped caring. He frowned. What are you talking about? I took a slow breath, then quietly spoke the words that would change everything he thought he knew about his past. Your mother is still alive. Owen stared at me as though I'd spoken another language. My mother? Alive? I nodded. Yes. He took a slow step backward. No, that's impossible. You told me she left. I told you she left. I never told you she died. He searched his memory. For the first time, he realized I was right. He had simply filled in the blanks himself. We sat together in the empty ballroom. The wedding staff quietly cleared tables around us. Nobody rushed us. I told him everything. How his mother had moved away. How she had written twice during his childhood. How she'd asked about him through the court. How every contact slowly disappeared. I never stopped you from finding her. I just refused to force someone to be your mother. He looked down. So she's in hospice. He swallowed hard. And she asked about me? She asked if you still smiled the way you did when you were 6. His eyes immediately filled with tears for several seconds. Neither of us spoke. Finally, he whispered, I don't even remember her face. No, but I remember yours. Those words nearly broke me. The next morning, we drove 3 hours together, not as strangers, not as friends, Simply, as a father and son trying to understand where they had lost each other. The hospice sat on a quiet hill overlooking a lake, peaceful, almost too peaceful. Helen met us at the entrance. She smiled gently. "I'm glad you both came." She led us down a quiet hallway, then stopped outside room 214. She gets tired easily. Owen's hands were shaking. "I don't know what to say." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to prepare a speech. Just be honest." He nodded once, then opened the door. His mother looked nothing like the woman I'd married. Time had changed all of us. Her hair was completely white, her face thin. The machines beside her made soft rhythmic sounds. She slowly opened her eyes. When she saw Owen, she smiled. "There you are." He stood frozen. "I'm sorry." She nodded weakly. "I know. I've been sorry for 31 years. He walked closer. "I spent my whole life wondering why I wasn't enough." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "It was never you. It was me. I kept waiting until I thought I deserved another chance. I never did." She reached for his hand. He took it. "I watched your graduation online. I watched your interviews. I watched your engagement announcement. I celebrated every success from a distance." He quietly cried. "I would have answered one phone call." She closed her eyes. "I know, and that's what hurts the most." Neither of them talked about blame anymore. There wasn't enough time for that. Instead, they talked about favorite foods, childhood memories, his first bicycle, the scar on his knee, the dog they'd once rescued together before she left. Small things, ordinary things, the kind of memories families are supposed to have. Before leaving, she looked toward me. "I never thanked you. You raised him. You became everything I failed to be." I shook my head. "I simply did what parents are supposed to do." She smiled softly. "No. You did what good parents choose to do." Those were the last words she ever spoke to me. She passed away peacefully 2 days later. After the funeral, Owen asked if we could stop somewhere before driving home. He directed me to my old neighborhood, then to the small brick house where he'd grown up. The porch swing was still unfinished, covered beneath the same tarp. He pulled it away. I remember this. I kept saying we'd finish it. I handed him a toolbox. Without another word, we started working, not because a porch swing mattered, because sometimes healing begins with something simple enough that neither person has to pretend. We spent the entire afternoon sanding old wood, replacing broken boards, tightening bolts, talking between long stretches of silence. Real silence, not the kind that pushes people apart, the kind that lets them slowly find each other again. Several months later, Amelia called. She and Owen had postponed the wedding indefinitely, not because she had stopped loving him, because she wanted to marry the man she'd fallen in love with, not the version he'd invented to impress everyone else. Counseling followed, long conversations, honest apologies, no miracles, no overnight transformation, just difficult work, the kind relationships actually require. Richard remained part of Owen's life, but something changed. The next time someone introduced Richard at a charity dinner, Owen smiled proudly and said, "This is my father-in-law." Then he walked across the room, placed an arm around my shoulder, and said, "And this is my dad." No hesitation, no embarrassment, no looking around to see who was watching, just truth. Simple, honest truth. Last spring, we finally finished the porch swing. We carried it into the backyard together, sat down, watched the sunset. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, Owen broke the silence. "You know, I used to think success meant becoming someone different." I smiled. "What do you think now?" He looked toward the old workshop where I'd spent countless evenings repairing appliances to keep food on our table. "I think success is becoming someone your father would recognize." I laughed quietly. "I always recognized you. You just forgot to recognize yourself." He nodded. "I won't make that mistake again." People often ask whether I forgave my son. The answer is yes. Not because he deserved forgiveness that day, but because he earned it afterward. Real forgiveness isn't built on apologies. It's built on changed behavior repeated over time. A father can survive being pushed to the back of a wedding. What he hopes never to survive is becoming invisible to the child he spent a lifetime helping become seen. Fortunately, my son eventually remembered something far more valuable than appearances. He remembered where home had always been.